Hello and welcome to this event, Cities, Climate Change and Multilateral Development Banks, Cooperation, Action and Delivery. My name is Nigel Jollins. I'm a co-lead of EBRD Green Cities. And first of all, apologies from Barbara Buchner, the Global MD of Climate Policy Initiative. Unfortunately, she's unwell this morning and I've had to take over. Now, as you know, cities are at the front line of dealing with climate change. And multilateral development banks are key partners for cities in this work. But what role do MDBs play? And what are they doing to help cities? And how do we cooperate? These are the questions that we're going to address today in this panel. And I'm joined by some very distinguished panelists. But first, what I'd like to do is hand over to Stephen O'Driscoll, who is the head of Environment, Climate and Social Policy at the EIB, to give an opening address. Please, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. It's a real pleasure to be here. Multilateral development banks, or MDBs as we're affectionately known, have really long been at the forefront of climate finance. And it's really my honour to set the scene for further discussion today with a summary of our collective efforts to address the climate crisis. This is actually a chance to explore how we contribute, but it's actually more importantly an opportunity to consider how together we might raise the bar, innovate and support cities in achieving their net zero goals. So why cities? Here at COP26 in Glasgow, we're reminded of the very urgent role that cities play in achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. Cities are actually responsible for more than 70% of today's greenhouse gas emissions. They're projected to contain more than 2/3 of the world's population by 2050, and their citizens face growing climate risks. So cities are major centres of innovation, and of course this can help build up and scale up solutions. So I'd like to make three main points initially, if I may. Firstly, all MDBs have programmes that promote and support climate action in a strategic and systematic way. These programmes are similar but tailored for their respective clients and regions, and they're all becoming more ambitious. Secondly, these programmes are successful, in part because MDBs cooperate with one another. And then thirdly, the role that MDBs play in supporting climate action in cities is necessary, but I would say not yet sufficient. And let me start by with some examples of the diversity of the kind of programs that the MDBs are running. So there's the Sustainable Cities Programme from the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, the Emerging and Sustainable Cities Programme at the Inter-American Development Bank, Making Cities More Livable from the Asian Development Bank, the Urban and Municipal Development Fund from African Development Bank, IFC's Cities Initiative by the IFC, Green Cities from the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and then finally the City Climate Finance Gap Fund that's co-managed by the World Bank and the European Investment Bank. All these programs contain some or all of the following components relevant for their clients: technical assistance, capacity building, concessional and or market rate finance, and donor support, of course. And let me give you some examples of this to make it a bit more concrete. The Asian Development Bank provides technical assistance and capacity building through trust funds under their Urban Financing Partnership Facility. This helps create livable cities projects that are green, competitive, inclusive, and resilient through feasibility assessments, project design and implementation support, pilot investment or viability gap financing. Under the GAP Fund, teams at the World Bank and EIB GIZ jointly screen applications for urban climate technical assistance and are implementing assignments such as piloting a green building certification incentive to integrate low carbon and climate resilient considerations into affordable and green housing development in Dakar in Senegal. And this could be scaled up to other cities, of course. And they are also supporting climate change adaptation measures, including urban greening along the southern Bug River in Vinnytsia in Ukraine. So these programs cover cities across the world, from Antananarivo in Madagascar to Bogota in Colombia, to Izmir in Turkey, to Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. And these programs each deliver very significant investments. For example, the EBRD Green Cities has signed more than €1 billion in green infrastructure for cities since 2016. And since 2004, IFC have invested and mobilized over $8 billion in more than 300 cities-related projects. MDBs support cities on urban transport, water and waste management, health, education, street lighting, smart city development, energy efficiency, nature-based solutions, and climate resilience. Cooperation also plays a very important role in MDB city programs. We cooperate across MDBs on co-financing investments, as well as knowledge sharing and capacity building. In the Maldives, the IADB and the ADB have worked together to improve public health conditions, help augment energy requirements, and contribute to ocean health through the co-financing of a waste-to-energy project for the Greater Mali area. This provides efficient and sustainable treatment and disposal infrastructure for the archipelagic state's solid waste management system. In Latin America, MDBs have joined forces to support one of the largest sustainable urban mobility infrastructure projects. That's the first metro line in Quito in Ecuador, co-financed by the EIB, the IADB, the World Bank and the Development Bank of Latin America, and the first metro line in Bogota in Colombia, partly financed by the EIB, the IADB, and the World Bank. And these will all improve accessibility and reduce congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. And knowledge sharing and capacity building is also imperative, I would say. We also build coalitions with other financiers, with city networks, the private sector and civil society. For example, many MDBs contribute to the work of the City's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which is being so effectively managed by Barbara and her team, and which brings together stakeholders in all of these areas. For example, the World Bank contributed to the CCFLA State of Cities Climate Finance Report in 2021 with innovative analysis and frameworks on enabling conditions for mobilizing urban climate finance. Just a few weeks ago, IFC held a knowledge sharing workshop across MDBs on the business case for green and affordable housing. And 81,000 stakeholders have participated in workshops, events, surveys, capacity building training, and provided input to the development of EBRD's Green City Action Plans. Without this cooperation, our ability to deliver and support climate action would be seriously hampered by a lack of knowledge, transfer of experience between institutions, potential duplication of efforts, and inefficiencies which we need to avoid if we actually want to tackle the climate crisis in the most effective way possible. And then finally, from me, the work of MDBs can't be seen in isolation, and nor can it be considered sufficient to meet the climate challenge in cities. Our role is to act as a catalyst to remove barriers, decrease risk, prove concepts, build capacity, and support governments and private sector to take action. We are acutely aware as MDBs that it takes the engagement of many stakeholders and deep partnerships across the public and private sector for projects to come to fruition and sustainable action to be taken. And I'm really pleased that we'll now be able to hear from our panelists about some of the concrete examples of how this happens. Thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much for setting the scene so well. Now, as I mentioned, we're joined here by a distinguished panel, and I'd like to introduce each of them in turn. So first of all, Manoj Sharma, the Chief of Urban Sector at the Asian Development Bank. Welcome. Stefan Eicher, Manager of Urban Development at the African Development Bank. Lynn O'Grady, Associate Director and Co-Lead on EBRD Green Cities. Tatiana Gallego, Division Chief, Urban Development and Housing Division from the Inter-American Development Bank. Welcome. Vivek, here in the studio with us, Global Head and Director of Climate Business at IFC. And Doda Njay, Head of Climate Change Practice at the Islamic Development Bank. And finally, last but not least, Sami Wahaba, Global Director, Urban Disaster Risk and Management, Resilience and Land Global Practice. My God, that's a long title, Sami, at the World Bank. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Before we proceed with the questions, I'd just like to remind the audience who have dialed in to post questions in the chat function of the YouTube. Now, I'm going to turn my first question to Vivek from the IFC. Vivek, it's clear that multilateral development banks co-finance and collaborate regularly. What further areas of opportunity do you see for MDBs to work together to support cities to achieve the Paris Agreement goals and carbon neutrality? Vivek, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Nigel. And let's just step back a bit and say, the magnitude of the challenge when it comes to cities, because there are reports out there which says that the maximum pressure that we're going to have in the next 3 decades is going to be an urbanization, because that's largely where job growth or jobs are going to be created, which means it's absolutely critical that we tackle the challenge to have greener, cleaner, and leaner cities, if I may say so, going forward. Now, the challenge is there's probably no place in the entire sort of space where you have energy, waste management, water management, urban transport, green buildings, smart cities, the entire gamut. And therefore, I don't think it's going to be ever possible for one institution to do this on a standalone basis. It has to be a combination of all of us getting together, either tackling each vertical separately or collectively, but very important that we collaborate at a very sort of holistic level when we approach these cities. And therefore, that complementarity that we provide is going to be critical there. So, I mean, one example is the way that EBRD and the World Bank are encouraging joint work in this space, and this panel is testimony to that. So, I believe what we need to collectively do is be able to demonstrate new models of success here. And then, once that's been demonstrated, how do we collectively scale them up? Now, this could be done, it could be done by one of the MDBs providing technical assistance, another one coming in with structures, and the third one financing or collectively. But each one of us can play a role, and it's important that we don't overlap. It's important that we have that distinction of who'll do what going forward. And then you need to use tools which will help cities decarbonize or reach their climate ambitions. Now, on models of success, I think there are, the latest one where we worked collaboratively with EBRD and MEGA is the Belgrade Waste to Energy project, which was, I think, a very ambitious and hopefully very successful one. That's a great example of how 3 institutions came together successfully on the policy front, de-risked it, and then got many other institutions to follow it. And I think that is critical. What we need to be doing is the ability to eventually attract private commercial capital to come in. Otherwise, we ourselves don't have the capacity or the balance sheets to finance everything. On tools, very briefly, each one of us has developed tools. We at the IFC have developed EDGE, which is a green building tool, which I think is going to be absolutely crucial if we are to decarbonize cities. So for new builds, we have EDGE. We've just piloted EDGE retrofit, which means you can go in and decarbonize in existing buildings because the embedded carbon footprint is already pretty high. And then we've just come out with a tool called APEX, which is really a sustainability tool for cities, which will help cities identify their emissions sector by sector. And that is where I think we can all come in and see how do we help these cities to get there. Finally, on Paris alignment, which is what your original question was, we've all agreed to Paris alignment goals. And I think as we are getting there, we need to have the ability and the willingness to engage with cities as they decide to have their operations also or their sort of infrastructure Paris aligned. So I think we can collaborate in a number of ways, but what's going to be critical is regular dialogue and the ability to ensure that we don't overlap and it's not a race to the bottom finally. Thanks.
Vivek, thank you very much. I've made a couple of points here. The regular dialogue, I think, is an important one, and also accurate tools for helping these kinds of renovations. Thank you very much, Vivek. Now, I'd like to turn to Tatiana. Tatiana, at the Inter-American Development Bank, we often, as MDBs, work at a very, let's say, global or big picture level, but I know you do a lot of work at the neighborhood level. Could you give us some examples of MDB collaboration at the neighborhood level, please?
Yeah. Certainly, thanks, Nigel. And I think, there were some excellent examples. Sorry, I think, this one is not working. There was some, I hope you can hear me well now. No, there were some excellent examples that were presented, in the speech on in areas of decarbonization, how we need to work together through, through electromobility and other areas. But for us, it's very important to get to the neighborhood level, and especially to those that are most vulnerable. More specifically, considering that, cities, because of their design, because of, their, the materials that are used in their construction, can create heat cores, and it has been demonstrated that in areas, most vulnerable, informal settlements, the temperatures are much higher. It is important to actually localize and focalize our efforts. On the other hand, many of these informal settlements are located in areas of high vulnerability, either, to landslides or to, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, etc. So, from our perspective, it's important to localize it. Now, I because of the time, I have chosen just one example that we work together with the World Bank on, and this is, the work on the informal settlement called Barrio 31, located just in the middle of the city of Buenos Aires, where together, we designed, resilient infrastructure, and we created spaces for living and for working for the people of these neighborhoods, spaces that were green, spaces, that were resilient, and they actually, limited or reduced, the exposure to floods, for instance. We worked together, through exercises of preparation, of execution, and now we're working together, through a joint exercise of evaluation. Now, I think the most important thing is to have a holistic concept. When it comes to actually working on a vision, it has to be, integral, and it has to be multi-sectoral on the one hand, but on the other hand, it has to reflect also the perception and the needs of the community. And I have to say that, in this particular case, at the very beginning of the design, we actually worked together through a 3-day workshop with the city and with the people in the neighborhood on identifying which ones were their priorities. We work on green spaces, we work on reduced flooding, on access, on improvement of housing and living conditions to ensure that, they were both resilient, but at the same time, they were in line with, for instance, certification that, that was highlighted by Vivek. And, throughout the execution, this has, taken also place, and it has, taken into consideration elements of green procurement, as well as, additional, design elements that strengthen our work together.
Thank you.
We'll
Tatiana.
see during the evaluation phase, what the results are, but thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank you, Tatiana. That's fantastic. I think your point about taking a holistic, systematic approach is so relevant for the work that we do across cities. I'd like to now turn to Lynn from the EBRD. I understand that you've worked together with the European Investment Bank on Skopje's wastewater treatment plant. Tell us about what was important about the cooperation there, and how did that cooperation help? What were some of the challenges you faced in the cooperation? Over to you, Lynn.
So thank you, Nigel. So before I talk about the Skopje wastewater treatment plant, I just want to share some really good news on the EBRD Green Cities programme. And yesterday at our board, they approved a €2 billion increase in this facility. So it takes our facility now to 5 billion. So we are very much in business to continue supporting our cities in delivering on their climate ambitions. So turning now to the Skopje wastewater treatment plant. Skopje is in northern Macedonia, and we financed EBRD together with EIB a new facility. And the main environmental benefits of this facility were first making sure that the citizens there had access to treated water, clean water, and second, it had a significant resilience component as well. In terms of the benefits of this investment, of collaboration with EIB, they were, first of all, it showed this region, our clients, that we are in business with working with EIB and other multilateral banks on green urban infrastructure investments. I think people very much think about EBRD and EIB collaboration being the big road and railways, all the connectivity investments. It also reinforced a partnership agreement that our two institutions have. And I mean, how did this cooperation help? So this cooperation really allowed us to push the green credentials of this investment. Both institutions have huge expertise in this area. Both institutions are very much completely committed to delivering on the Paris Agreement. We're now in the delivery stage. That's the important part of the project. And working with EIB, we will be able to work with our client to make sure that that investment is delivered as speedily as possible. That is so important. In terms of the challenges, well, I mean, generally our cooperation with EIB is very good. The one challenge we have from time to time is that our shareholding structure is not completely aligned, and it means that sometimes our policies are not completely aligned. And just to give you one example on disclosure, and that just means that we have timing issues. But yes, just going back to my point, generally collaboration with EIB is good. It's good with MDBs, and given this major boost that we had with the program yesterday, we are very much here to work with other MDBs. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Lynn, for that. That's excellent. And I take your point about both the positive elements, but also some of the challenges with respect to things like disclosure and so on. Thank you. So now I'd like to turn to Stefan. Stefan, who's joining us from Abidjan, I think. Welcome. And I want to ask you a question around knowledge sharing, because I think knowledge sharing is an important part of the way that multilateral development banks work and collaborate, particularly in the space of cities. Could you share some examples for us of how MDBs and you in particular have used knowledge sharing as part of the climate action in cities? Over to you, Stefan.
Thanks very much, and thank you again for the invitation. The thing that we had to learn is that the own institution setup itself. So we learned from the other MDBs, from the IADB and the World Bank and others, how did they set up their own shop. The AfDB has been in cities for 50 years, but we never had our own division or to look at things on a global element. So that we had to learn from this. So we actually went to tour, and we met a lot of the MDBs in Washington and asked them, how do you do this? From there, we kind of to build instruments, for example, to build a trust fund, and we talked about the Urban and Municipal Development Fund. We should set up to be able to engage cities and offer this technical assistance on planning, on governance, on project preparation. So we learn from you and prepare tools like the city diagnostics. How do we do this? So we also learned from on the knowledge sharing is this was a very practical knowledge area where we gained a lot of experience quickly from the experience of other MDBs. Also, what can we offer downstream? And we also learned what was doing to the subnational with or without a guarantee from the sovereign. So we put something as a guideline for subnational finance that we issued in 2019. But of course, and now we are learning another part is how to get our cities ready for capital increase. And how to borrow, especially even borrowing on local currency, and so how to engage our CFOs, if you want. So that's also something that we are learning with other MDBs. Last but not least is the green city finance. Our good friend from Manoj and from the ADB and the EBRD have a fantastic program with the GCF. And also we are piggyback on this and learning their experience to build our own on the continent green city program. So all this is going, and the downstream is clear when you're looking at activities. For example, the World Bank did a lot of work, for example, in Dar es Salaam on, for example, on mobility. So they did the phase 1. So that enabled the AfDB to come afterwards for phase 2. Same thing with Kampala. A lot of work from the World Bank. A huge amount of work on KCCA, and I'm sure Sharma will talk about it later. And we came afterwards with additional finance for the roads. In Abidjan, for example, is the reverse. We are financing a large bridge, and now Same and his team are coming to add a BRT on top of the fourth bridge in Abidjan, enabling the connectivity and public transport in the system. So this collaboration is only from our side at the beginning, but it's ramping up. So those kind of meetings are very, very important. We had just to close, we had a very interesting discussion with SECO. So but they had a really good discussion last week, I believe, Same, about how to do city diagnostics. So we learned a lot from the other MDBs present, so how they're doing it. And so this is something that we're really gaining on this knowledge sharing. Back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Stefan. I took note here. I think I would call it maybe phasing and also playing to the strengths of the different MDBs and the different parts of the project preparation and implementation. Thank you. That was very helpful. I'd now like to turn to Same. Same is joining us online here, and to ask a question around our collaboration, not just internally within MDBs, but also with city networks. Now, because we need to expand our collaboration beyond just our own MDB network. So, Same, how does the World Bank collaborate with city networks, for example, the C40 and ICLE and so on, and the other development partners, or even other development finance institutions, and why is this important? Same, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel, and a pleasure to be here with you and with our other MDB colleagues. Now, for us at the World Bank, doing more to support cities on climate change and climate action is really critical. So in the past 5 years, we've lent $83 billion in climate finance, and we've also since then increased our targets on both climate mitigation and adaptation for the coming 5 years. So we will be channeling 125 billion in the coming 5 years, with at least half of this amount going to adaptation. And in doing so, and in recognition of the very important role of cities in terms of scaling up climate finance going forward, our new climate change action plan for 2021 till 2025 has a focus on cities and urban systems on a par with energy, with transport, with food and manufacturing. Now, in the urban portfolio alone, we've already been channeling 65% of our financing towards climate action. But at the same time, as everyone has spoken before me, I mean, there's so much more that we need to do in terms of mobilizing the levels of climate finance we need for cities, both on the mitigation front, to reach our 1.5-degree target, also for adaptation. And the scale and magnitude of the challenge is so big that we all need to be working together. So in this regard, we've been scaling up our efforts to collaborate, not just with the other MDBs, and several examples were mentioned, but also with the city networks and the development partners. Now, the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, what we call Gap Fund in short, is an example of a recent initiative with a central role for partnerships. So we've developed a very strong partnership between the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, and GIZ. And we also have a very strong collaboration with the city networks. And that includes the Global Covenant of Mayors, ICLE, C40, and also CCFLA. And on the back end, I mean, the GAP Fund is basically 2 trust funds that coordinate seamlessly. But when the city client sees it, they see only a one-stop shop. And now, as part also of our efforts, to harmonize investments and scale up climate finance for cities, we've also been working on leveraging co-financing from other MDBs here today, and also bilateral development agencies, whether AfD of France, BMZ of Germany, FCDO of the UK, SECO of Switzerland, and ICID of Spain. A few examples, I mean, in Tunisia, our integrated disaster resilience program, which has 100% climate co-benefits, is jointly financed by the World Bank and IFD. It also builds on work that was supported by GIZ, AfDB, and KfW, and draws on technical assistance provided by with grants from SECO. In China, we work on the Green Urban Financing and Innovation Project, also 94% climate co-benefits, jointly financed between the World Bank and KfW. And today, the new Development Bank and IFC are exploring ways to co-finance it. In India, the Kerala Solid Waste Management Project, 100% co-financing, and again, jointly financed with AIIB, and Tatiana and Stefan mentioned several other examples. So I mean, in conclusion, this collaboration is critical because of the magnitude of the challenge, the need to better optimize the use of concessional funds and to work together in harmonized action so that we can scale up climate action. Thank you, back to you.
Thank you, Seme. And look, I noted a couple of things. I think your point about so much more needing to be done, I think that's well taken. And also, I'm not sure the audience appreciates just how challenging it is and how much effort goes into making sure that trust funds can seamlessly work across. That's a huge amount of effort, and I applaud both banks for working to be able to set that up. Thank you, Sameh. So I'd like to now turn to Dauda at the Islamic Development Bank. Dauda, I understand that you have recently approved the bank's urban sector operational strategy. How does that strategy link with the bank's climate action plan and the bank's ambition of 35% climate finance by 2025? Dauda, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel. So the Islamic Development Bank, like you said, one of the benefits we had as a climate change team was that we had our climate change policy that was first approved before the urban policy and the other sector policies were approved, which has significantly helped us in mainstreaming climate change in our sector policy and operational strategies. If you look at one of the key elements of the climate change policy, it was to make sure that climate change was mainstream in these. And when you look at the urban sector operational strategies, in each of the strategic objectives, you could see that there is a place for climate action, whether it's under urban economies, creating green jobs, or urban mobility, the social housing, also access to safe and clean water and sanitation, and one strategic objective that is completely related to urban resiliency to climate and human-induced disasters. And also the strategy uses an integrated urban operating model, which really helps in having cross-sectoral approach and thematic collaboration. So through this, we've been able to finance some integrated projects in cities. One example is in Freetown, for example, supporting the water company through not only making sure that you are integrating nature-based solutions through catchment level conservation, but also creating green jobs for the youth. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you very much, Dauda. And I noted this integrated word links very much, I think, to what Tatiana was talking about in terms of the holistic and systematic approach to climate action. Now, I'd like to turn to our last panelist, Manoj, all the way from Manila. Thanks for staying awake so late, Manoj. So MDBs excel at providing technical assistance and capacity building and support for cities. Manoj, how has providing this kind of support enabled ADB to help cities in their climate action? Manoj, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel. So greetings from Manila. Let me start by mentioning that ADB's long-term strategic framework, Strategy 27 Operation Priorities. We aim to support cities become green, competitive, inclusive, and resilient, or in short, livable. So for us in ADB, Livable Cities is a cross-sector and cross-thematic platform for providing integrated solutions. On your first point, you are very right, Nigel. Technical assistance to member countries certainly helps us change the discourse to find innovative measures on resilience in urban infrastructure projects. For example, ADB's technical assistance interventions support analytical work and project preparation in critical areas, such as low carbon transformation, circular economy, environmental improvement projects, including citywide, inclusive sanitation, energy efficiency improvement, use of latest technologies and digital solutions, and so on and so forth. In short, use of ADB's technical assistance has helped cities in our DMCs or developing member countries leapfrog to the best available solutions in frontier areas of building climate resistance. On your second point on capacity building support, we in ADB follow a more long-term and participatory and hand-holding approach. We become partners with our stakeholders. We are kind of sticky. We don't leave them soon and continue to stick to them for a long time. So the key interventions include support to cities to deal with shocks and stresses, including pandemics, strengthen preparedness and emergency response plans for disasters, localize NDCs under the Paris Agreement or localize SDGs. So we believe in supporting cities to improve their systems, processes, documents, and engagement with various stakeholders. In short, cities adopt a systems approach to urban infrastructure resilience. And knowledge sharing here among MDB members certainly helps cities in this regard. Just to give a couple of examples here, the city of Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, with support from ADB, GCF, and other development partners, is establishing 20 eco-districts with homes having district heating systems, solar panels, insulated buildings, and parks that will reduce carbon emissions and air pollution. We already discussed a collaboration with AIADB in Greater Malay area in Maldives on solid waste management, so I'm not going to repeat that. So one of the areas which Sammy also mentioned is about trust funds. So just to give an example here, ADB's Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund and the newly approved 100 million Urban Resilience Trust Fund, which was launched by FCDO only yesterday during the COP, helps scale up the efforts for urban resilience in the region. And finally, ADB is increasing its climate finance ambition from $80 billion US to $100 billion US until 2030. There is a need to scale up transformative adaptation and resilience projects in our cities. So we want to enhance projects in climate sensitive sectors such as urban, agriculture, and water, particularly on adaptation and resilience. And in short, enhancing resilience will make cities more livable. So thank you. Back to you, Nigel.
Manoj, thank you very much. You've made it very clear that technical assistance is so important to the work we do on cities and climate action. I just remind the audience to post any questions that you have on the YouTube chat function. And we do have some questions already come in from Drazen Kuchan at the Green Climate Fund, who many of us have worked with in the past. He asks, in summary, how can climate finance mechanisms like the GCF further support MDBs to invest in green and smart cities? So I'd like to first ask this question to my colleague Lynn, since we have been working with Drazen on GCF, and maybe I'll also ask Stefan after that to comment. So first of all to Lynn, GCF and green cities.
So just to say that we have GCF financing for the EBRD Green Cities program, and they support 9 of our green cities. I think how GCF can help us is first on mobilizing as much grant content as we can from that institution, particularly for resilience projects, which is an area of focus. And the second, just going on this capacity building, it's an area that we focus on, and using GCF support for that as well. But I think the main thing is grant funding is very important to scale up.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks very much. And I wonder, Stefan, have you got any comments you'd like to make on this?
Sure. I mean, if grant finance is important in Eastern Europe, it's even more important in Africa. This is a case where we're using the trust fund, the urban and municipal trust fund, to build our proposal for GCF for the Green City program for Africa. So this is a grant financing to access the bigger grant. So and we're learning from ADB, from EBRD on how they're doing it, and working very closely with with our friends in Seoul. Back to you.
Stefan, and we've got another question come in from Barbara's team at the CCFLA Climate Policy Initiative. In summary, how can we improve the process of translating project preparation, technical assistance work with cities into projects that are actually financed by MDBs? And I'd first like to ask Manoj that question. So how can we translate from this technical assistance into actual project finance? Manoj, over to you.
This is a very critical point. Preparation of projects and link into downstream financing is absolutely critical to ensure that the preparation actually gets translated into real action and benefits to our people and citizens. What we have experienced in ADB is that upstream engagement with cities and possible downstream financiers is really critical, so that the project preparation actually takes into account the requirements of the downstream financing agencies. And this could be done both on the sovereign side, working with ADB or AfDB or World Bank. We can prepare the project according to their requirements. If it's a PPP project or a project to be financed by the private sector, then it will require a different kind of transaction. And so those requirements will be different. So the upstream engagement with the downstream financier is really critical. And second point from my side is that even the engagement with cities and the governments in terms of analytical work, knowledge work, and capacity building is equally important, and to strengthen the institutions which will implement those projects. These are sometimes forgotten in just the pure due diligence on infrastructure. So that institutional aspects in working with the cities and the government is also really critical and essential. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. And I can see that this question has hit a nerve. We've also got Srdjan Petrovic, who's joined us from Belgrade, who's asked the same question. So maybe we'll stick on this theme. I'll turn to Tatiana. Tatiana, same question then. This taking the projects from just the technical assistance into finance, what role or what can we do to speed up that process? Over to you, Tatiana.
Thank you, Nigel, and thanks for the question. Personally, I think that it is a process of development. There has to be commitment. First of all, there has to be a firm commitment, from the onset, not just on preparing a study, but going through with it. I think there's different elements that contribute to the success of going from a study to financing. First of all, I think is ensuring that there is sufficient buying, not just from the city itself, but also from the citizenship. At the end of the day, it's the citizens that own the project, and creating that partnership from the onset is essential. The second thing that I think is critical, as Manoj was mentioning, is capacity. But there has to be a capacity, not only just technical or climatic to implement the project, but also, as Same and some of the colleagues have highlighted, is we need to strengthen the municipal finance capacity to make sure that this is a stage of repayment, of further buying and strengthening in the long term.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tatiana. That's great to add some more meat to the bone around this important part of the process of conversion from technical assistance through to finance. We have another question that's come in. Interesting here, and this is something that's been the focus a lot of the discussions around COP, is how to bring in private finance into this work on climate action in cities. And I'd like to ask both Dauda and Same to respond to that. First of all, Dauda, how can we bridge this emissions gap further by bringing in the private sector finance?
Thank you. The private sector finance has been an issue that many MDBs and the overall world is a little bit struggling when it comes to climate finance, because it's all about you know, how to have the right mix of public support to de-risk the investment from the private sector, and in the specific case of the cities as well, you need to have maybe the involvement of guarantee mechanisms, insurance mechanisms, and strong political commitment to support the cities. We have seen some cases where through the commitment from the political side, you could see cities that are able to have strong private sector support when it comes to actions that are linked with climate finance, whether it is in the area of energy or water availability, or green job creation. So I think there are a few challenges. But it's really a matter of commitment and the right set of stakeholders that could help in enhancing the climate finance from private sector.
Great, thank you very much, Dauda. Same, what can you add then to this challenge that we have of crowding in private capital to the city climate action finance? Sami, over to you.
Thanks, Nigel. I think there are two fundamental points. One is, thinking about public-private partnerships, especially on aspects of social and environmental risk that are associated with some of these interventions. If you're trying to build a new landfill, the private sector might find the new landfill project itself viable, but if they have to get into the environmental remediation of the existing municipal dump, if they have to get into the socioeconomic inclusion of waste pickers, etc., it might be a bit much more of a daunting challenge than would have otherwise been feasible. So bringing in a public sector partner, that in a partnership could cover some of these aspects of the social environmental risk becomes important. On the other hand, as Dauda said, it is about guarantees and credit enhancement so that you can de-risk private investment in climate smart and resilient urban infrastructure, and especially in new terrains, in places where there has been no track record of private investment beforehand. And for them to be able to go in, you need to start thinking about structuring some guarantees that could have some pari passu type, first loss arrangement that could step in and enable the private sector to embark on these, if you will, uncharted waters. Again, it's not meant to transform a bad project into a good project, but it's meant to cover aspects of risks, where there's an information asymmetry, etc. Back to you, Nigel.
Sami, thanks very much. We've got another question now come in. Very interesting question here about direct sub-sovereign lending. I'll turn this question over to my colleague Lynn at the EBRD, and then I'll ask for input from anyone else, because this, I think, is quite interesting here and also poses quite a lot of challenge. First, so could direct sub-sovereign lending increase MDB climate city finance, and how can we grow this further? Over to you, Lynn.
So, I mean, this is a business model that I think EBRD has been able to deploy very effectively, particularly in Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans and the Caucasus, whereby we're lending direct to the city or to a utility company. I think in order to, it is a business model that is not, I mean, looking at Stefan here, it is a business model that is not commonplace in Africa, for example. I mean, how you scale it up is twofold. First of all, making sure that the regulations are actually there to allow subnational, sub-sovereign borrowing in the first place. And second, and I think all of us have made that point at this panel, it's about capacity building up the capacity, the financial capacity of either the city or the utility company, so that they are able to take these loans on their own balance sheet. I think, as Nigel said, it is a really interesting area. I think also that there is much to be done, and I think also it's where collaboration across the MDBs is really required. And I think Stefan already made the point that we made a start on this with the African Development Bank a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Lynn. That's excellent. So, an important area, but challenging. I wonder, Tatiana, could you add to the discussion then around this role of sub-sovereign lending, and how can we grow this to help city climate action and finance? Tatiana.
Yes. Thank you, Nigel. Yes, and I take this opportunity to thank also the EBRD, and we've had very extensive discussions with Susan, who has extensively helped us understand the experience that the EBRD has had in sub-sovereign lending. Sub-sovereign lending in Latin America and the Caribbean is still limited, but we have had the opportunity to start working with several cities in strengthening the creditworthiness, their financial capacity, and to start also conceptualizing the use of alternative instruments like land value capture, tax increment finance, and some initial steps towards the preparation of bonds, which for larger cities like Sao Paulo, like Mexico, it's very real, and they do it on a regular basis. But for smaller cities, it's much more project based. Personally, I think that going forward, sub-sovereign lending is going to become much more important, as decentralization takes a greater role, and at the same time, from a fiscal perspective, both cities and national governments, need to take a part of the burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. So I just open the floor now to Stefan, Sami, or Manoj. Any other comments on the importance of sub-sovereign? I think Stefan, please, over to you.
Sure. Thanks. From our perspective, one of the priorities on the continent is really creating capital, local currency borrowing, if you want. And I'm not sure about the bond aspect of things. What we could actually do on this is really turn and focus on intermediaries and make them real intermediaries, not just the postal service. And just passing the buck, but real. So that would be my focus. We are currently working with the FEC, the Fonds d'équipement communal in Morocco. We're working with RIAFCO in the elements, and also in the Central and Western Africa. So it seems to us that is going to be one of the ways forward, not to go small, but to go for intermediaries, focusing on cities. Back to you.
Stefan, thanks very much. That's a really interesting point about intermediaries. Tatiana, do you want to come in as well?
No, I think what Stefan said is perfectly great.
Okay, great. Sami, any points on this? We do have another question come in, but if you've got any points on the sub-sovereign, we'll take that and then move on.
I mean, just a very minor point. I think we hear a lot about how basically lots of cities would like to access the without sovereign guarantee the capital of, if you will, the MDBs. But it's important to note that it will not be when IDA, IBRD, and other MDBs are lending, they're lending at they go to the capital markets. There is funding with their AAA rating, and then they on-lend that amount with the sovereign guarantee. There's practically no project risk. However, the moment we start talking about no sovereign guarantees, we're talking about project risk and very different financing terms. So, I mean, again, I'm sure this is well-known knowledge, but sometimes it eludes some of our clients. And then the other very important point, in my opinion, would be to start thinking about things that could enhance that creditworthiness, about own source revenues, about leveraging land and urbanization through a land value capture type mechanism, about fixing intergovernmental fiscal transfers, because these will become the foundations on which the cities will be able to enhance their credit worthiness and will be able to, in the presence of an enabling regulatory environment, access the capital markets. Thanks, Nigel.
Sami, thank you for that. And I think what you've done is helping to unpack the complexity of that is so important, because it's so easy to make platitudes around it. Oh, we've got to do sub-sovereign lending, but until you get in and unpack the details, you can't really liberate that finance. Now, I know I've got both Manoj and Lynn who'd like to say something. So first of all to Lynn and then to Manoj.
Can I just go back to that original question that I got from Drazen at GCF, and it sort of links with this non-sovereign. So as Sami rightly points out, for non-sovereign financing, it has implications for the pricing. The pricing at sovereign is much lower, basically. And this is also where facilities like the one we have with GCF, it really allows us to scale up on sovereign pricing. It allows us to go to a city to offer that product and for it to be attractive. That's all I wanted to say, Nigel.
Right. Thank you, Lynn. And over to Manoj, please.
Thank you, Nigel. I just want to raise another important issue that pertains to local government bonds or subnational bonds or municipal bonds. So these bonds provide a robust source of financing urban infrastructure. And such bond markets at the subnational level or local government level has matured in countries like the United States. Just to give an example, in 2019, almost $4 trillion worth of municipal bonds were issued in the US. But unfortunately, in our developing member countries of almost all the MDBs, this bond market has not really picked up. So recently in ADB, we have started analytical work and knowledge work in supporting our cities to become creditworthy and be able to issue municipal bonds to raise finances. This could be a potentially huge source of additional financing for our cities to develop infrastructure. Just wanted to make that point. Yeah. Thank you. But it's quite challenging at the same time.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you. Obviously, that question has stimulated a bit of a discussion. We've got another question now come in around what urban sectors do you think we need to finance more and to develop low carbon resilient cities that support the Paris Agreement. And I'd like to first ask this question to Dauda. Dauda, over to you.
Thank you. Since we're talking about low carbon, I think like the transport sector, mobility is going to be very important. Energy efficiency in, for example, in regions like the MENA region, I think there is a huge potential in that. And yeah, building sector, when I talk about energy efficiency, and water and sanitation, and energy sector, of course.
Okay, brilliant. So I open to the floor now. Before we wrap up, this will be the last chance for you to make a comment on what do you think are the most important sectors for us to focus on. I'll check in first of all with Stefan. Stefan, if you had one sector to invest in, which would be the most important sector for the African Development Bank?
I was hoping to go last, so I could pick up the ideas from the others. Urban development is territorial, not sectoral, so it's difficult, and it's on a case-to-case basis. In some areas, it's transport; the others, it's water. I think it's a very difficult question to ask as a broad. I cannot speak for 54 member countries, but and it's very different from North Africa to Central Africa. Some of them are very basic. This water, sanitation. It's really getting the basic rights. I mean, Sami and the EBRD and others would also working on the continent will also tell you that it's not necessarily a one size fit all. So I think going green right now, we could say transport, but again, transport is run by the private sector on the continent. There's very little public money going in transport, at least public transport itself. And now we have seen more investment from rail and BRTs, but it's only now. Before, it's only the informal sector that's running the whole thing. So, so the government needs to get involved. So I think it's a time where I think my own opinion is that government needs to get really involved in tracing back the basic services first, making sure that the basics are working well and that the system is working appropriately. And those will be different. It could be water sanitation, solid waste, and massive issue on the continent. How do we turn that problem into a real source of good things for agriculture, for a lot of things that can be done from getting your solid waste and solid waste sorted out. So a very difficult question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But I like your phrase there that urban systems or cities are territorial rather than sectoral, and the need to be able to take a case-by-case basis. I think that's very, very well made. That's a very well made point. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this time. So I'd just like to summarize with a couple of insights from what I've heard each of the panelists make. And I think summarize 3 C's. First of all, we'll say catalyst. It's been pretty clear to me listening to everyone that MDBs play a very strong catalytic role in promoting climate action in cities. Second, this notion of comprehensiveness that Tatiana made very early on, the importance of being holistic, of comprehensive view, and this is the point that Stefan finished on, this territorial context-specific look at the urban system. And finally, the C of collaboration, and that we all complement one another in the work that we do together, whether it's in co-financing, whether it's cooperating in the technical assistance and the project development, and not just with one another in the MDBs, but across and beyond that to include the city networks. Sami mentioned C40, ICLE, many others that we collaborate with. All of this creates this ecosystem for climate finance in cities. And with that, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for your time. Thank you very much, and thanks to the audience for dialing in. I hope you found this useful. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.